as a news journalist. He carried a lot of articles during the sweeping reforms of 1991, and his probably most memorable story broke in 2008 when he conducted an investigation into corruption in the judiciary in Ghaziabad. In fact, the death penalty is another subject close to his heart, and that might be mentioned in his deliberations this evening. And the final panelist is a friend for over half a century. And that is Mr. Ashok Vishwanathan. When a graduate in mathematics decides to become a film director, this itself represents a citizen's action of some sorts. For Ashok is a mathematics graduate from St. Xavier's College and a graduate in film direction from the Film and Television Institute of India. He's currently the professor and head of the Department of Producing for Film and TV Specialization at the Satyajit Ray Film and Television Institute, and also lectures in Jadavpur University. Ashok has made many award-winning features and documentaries, such as The Lighthouse, The Ocean and the Sea. He's directed commercial films like Shesh Shonghat, and has also made films like Gumshuda. He has served as chairperson of the jury for non-feature films in National Film Awards. In fact, Ashok Vishwanathan's films have won a lot of national awards, one of which was in fact called Shunno Theke Shuru, and the other one was called Kichu Songlap, Kichu Prolap. Today we will hear Ashok's Songlap and hopefully not his Prolap. And that brings us to the end of the session of introduction. I think they're such eminent people that I had to delve a little bit about them, and particularly had to make sure that their introduction was longer than Kunal's introduction of the moderator. You know, the discussion today is on the theme citizens' action, help or hindrance. So, you know, when citizens act, we hold a panel discussion about it. And the oldest club in Asia decides that will be the subject of its annual panel discussion. Does that mean in democracy, citizens acting or action of citizens is considered to be an exception rather than the rule? And our role as citizens in a democracy is to be passive observers of the process of democracy for all except 2 days every 5 years. Does this citizens' action lead to any results at all? And I'm going to throw these two questions open to my panelists first. Is it so unusual for having a citizens' action? And if you have citizens' action, does it lead to any results at all? Mr. Shamul Dotto to kick off.
Ladies and gentlemen, while I was driving down Ho Chi Minh's Foray, I was asking myself what happened that I came under the scanner of city's most eminent surgeon that I have been called to this evening. And answer that I got to myself was perhaps he wanted some archival person to deal with the matter, to let's get back to historical past of the question he has raised. I'll just stretch it a bit more than saying yes or no. When you look at the history of citizen acts or action, I consider it as a part of function of citizenship. And if you take citizenship into consideration, you find this journey has been rather coarse, tough, and not so smooth. And its history has been as old as history itself. Because ultimately citizenship is nothing but an expression of what people think, do, Act speech. When we joined the service, cutting it short, we never knew that we have some citizens groups acting on behalf of the citizens with their authority or sanction. Neither we knew that we are supposed to meet or interact with such persons or groups. And mostly, if you divide India's history between 1947 and today, 2023, you find the entire stretch of more than 70 years can be divided into two distinct parts. One was the part before the independence, another was immediately following the independence, third was a period of total passivity, and last one was what to do. After all, we have seen if citizens had not acted, perhaps we would not have assembled here. Now, when you look at the history of this period, in the year 1980s, in fact, we started seeing some growth of citizens groups all over the country. Before that, we had seen what had the Marxists done in West Bengal in terms of grouping people and trying to indoctrinate them or infuse them with a particular political philosophy. But this citizen group that we saw, though had left leanings, but was something different from the one which was organized under the banner of the political parties. Now these action groups, when we joined the service, we found to have come up under the banner of citizen action groups, social action groups, Christian action groups, like that. Now when you have citizen action groups or social action groups, you can presume or presuppose that the cause for which they champion relate to the depravity of people, marginalization of the society, and causes which really meant for bread and butter. Now when we joined the service, there was no question of opening a window of conversation with those particular classes who agitate against the state, against the administration. But one could see certain definite pattern in their function, in their activities, and in their way they conducted the business. First of all, we saw that they form in small groups, they breed ideas, advocate protest, and try to take the ire of the people against the administration of the government. And this particular feature of their conduct made us slightly nervous as to whether to interact with such people, which is taken as an adversary of the administration or not. And therefore, a kind of a communication gap took place between such groups and the administration. But lo and behold, we saw what interest we can derive after interacting or being in touch with such organization or association to derive benefit from. I remember when we were in the district, the Naxalite movement, the way it was being carried out or conducted, we decided that there must be some window of opportunity into the organizations, and therefore why not try to open a dialogue with them, though clandestine and much behind the glare of the public. But gradually we found that the administration has found an outlet into the group which is mostly operating in the conflict zone and trying to champion the cause of the downtrodden. When it happened, there was no sanction from the government as such. It was all behind the back of the government. And when it slowly and gradually started producing results, we saw that citizens' actions are definitely in the interest of the society, but they had a cause or they had a bag to carry. And that particular bag was something anti-state, administration or anti-this thing. But lo and behold, with the progress in dialogue with them, we found that we are meeting a common ground whereby their interests can be easily met by the administration in collaboration with the groups championing the cause of the poor and the downtrodden. So if you ask me, Citizen Act, does it help? Did we allow it to happen? Did we collaborate with the cause? After all, whatever we do, we ultimately do in the best interest of the society. And I must say that citizens' actions were taken into account and were of help and did show some guidelines to the people in administration that these are the areas you must have a look at it and you can do something about it with the collaboration and support of ours. It will be much faster, quicker and much more wholesome.
Mr. Doctor, while you're on the subject, as an administrator, did you regard these citizens' movements as a hindrance to administrative function?
Not at all. It all depends on what kind of equation you build up with such agitators or agitations. And when you find that there are areas where you can have a common cause, those areas can be segregated and a kind of a parallel course of dialogue be pursued with them. And with regard to the areas where you have differences of opinion, that can pain for a while and you can think of dealing with it in a manner slightly different from what you have done before.
Let's get Mr. Devi Goenka into this now. Do you think that these sort of movements are an exception rather than a rule, and do you think they achieve anything at all, because you've really been involved in lots of them?
Well, I've been confined to environmental movements all my life, and everything I've done is in the public interest. There's nothing personal about this. The fact is that if citizens were happy with what the government was doing, there would be no role for NGOs at all. The fact that so many NGOs exist and so many people come on the streets or make demands means that they're not happy with the functioning of either the politicians or the bureaucracy or both. And my personal experience has been that when people express their thoughts loudly and come on the streets, politicians and bureaucrats both sit up and take notice. To a large extent, I've been involved with citizen movements like Narmada and Save the Western Ghats and so on. And I think in many ways these have actually succeeded in doing what they set out to do. But some of the fallouts have also been quite inexplicable. But nevertheless, I think the fact that citizens have taken to the streets and expressed their views has made a difference. And I think it's a very great thing for me to see that there are NGOs all over the country now becoming more vocal and more active and getting involved in the day-to-day affairs and trying to improve things in the country.
Mr. Goenka, how do you get a politician to agree to preserve a forest for a tiger because the tigers do not have voting rights?
A very good question. Very difficult to persuade a politician to protect a forest to save a tiger, because as you quite rightly said, tigers don't have votes. But if you can explain to the politician that forest equals to water, and without water the voting population will not survive, then he obviously takes a different point of view. So I think it's an argument that needs to be more explicitly stated. We're not trying to save forests only for wildlife, we're trying to save forests for our own survival. And in this age of climate change, I think every tree is precious. I don't think we can afford to lose a single square inch of grassland or forest anymore.
Okay, let's get Ms. Chaudhary in. You have been involved with a lot of action on various fronts. You've spoken out where a lot of your colleagues have never dared to speak out. What do you think? Do you think citizens' actions do achieve any results?
First of all, I would thank Bengal Club for permitting me to speak. It's an honor. There's a very literate, empowered citizens group sitting right in front. So to proceed, yes, I believe in citizens groups. I believe in them implicitly. Right at the beginning, I had some moments of resistance, but it took me only a few months to learn that they gave you information, they put pressure for various things, which some could be done, some couldn't be done, some should not be done, but you got feedback. So apart from my personal experience, I want to get back to a basic question which I would ask Dr. Chatterjee. Citizens movements, it covers everything. are we really speaking of the urban citizen who's vocal? Because you know, if you citizens' action, like you said, Naxalites or environmentalists, just anybody, I mean, very big and very small. But I personally believe that the single person is also capable of a lot of action. There's a very famous Hindi novel which is about one solitary person who keeps on going to the court and petitioning and petitioning and petitioning. And it exposes the legal system. Unfortunately, I've forgotten the name. You might be able to say if you know it. It's a very famous novel. I forgot the name of the author. But anyway, this is one single person fighting the legal system. And I was very impressed. I can't read Hindi, but anyway, I'll skip through it. So when we talk about citizens' action, we're actually dealing with a very large area. And I submit that for people like us, who have a lot to lose, I mean, we are not revolutionaries. We can't really march out into the streets and do things. But I submit that each one of us is capable of registering protest, of not allowing the little things to get away. When the maid comes and complains that the police is not taking a complaint against her husband, I think it is the duty of the citizen to escort the maid to the thana and ensure that that complaint is registered. You'll be surprised to know how many thanas just throw them out. No, এসব তো সবসময় হচ্ছে, যাও তো যাও. How many people actually pluck up the guts to go to a thana and talk? They don't. By the way, I'm not attacking the police. We are much worse. I mean, if you go to, say, a ration shop, I was food secretary. And I know how terrible it was, how difficult it was to get a ration card. Things have improved a bit now because of computerization. But in my time, I'm talking about 2005, getting a new ration card was pure hell. And the saddest thing of all, there were people who had false ration cards. Now, I took 2 extra. I said, how on earth did you get 2 extra? I managed. Now, this is the citizen speaking who is very conscious of his rights and not of his duties. So, when we talk about citizens' action, there is a lot of scope for self-examination. Exactly what are we doing? Are we just sitting back and watching other citizens do something, or do we actually want to do something? As a bureaucrat, I had a lot of interaction with many groups. I'm sure some of them hate me because I was not able to do what they asked. Some of them were very time wasting, and I just could not but help them to get out. It's not polite, but then I have to get my work done also. So there's a balancing act all the time. How much do you interact? What can you do? What can't be done? But I want to take this opportunity to tell you about a little group I'm a member of. It's called the Constitutional Conduct Group. This is basically a Google group. Most of the members are located in Delhi, but across the country also. It consists of civil servants from various services. So the small thing that we retired old people have been doing, we've been writing letters to the President, the Chief Justice, the Attorney General, to the public, pleading various causes like the release on bail of the rapists of Bilqis Khan, or the development coming up in the Nicobar Island where they want to port. Various issues we hold up. Now, does it make any difference at all that we are doing this? Our group, which has currently about 200 members, spends half the time discussing by email, by posts, that are we doing anything useful? Is it worth it? Who reads our letters? Nobody reads them. Maybe the paper gives 2 lines. But I'm happy to say it irritates the administration, I mean Government of India in this case, very, very much. It irritates them. And I submit that irritating people in power, which includes politicians and administrators of every service, is a very important role for the ordinary citizen. If we see injustice, we should speak. So speaking truth to power, it certainly helps. One can't say that it's a futile action, that it's just ego satisfaction, because there's a risk here. Every time one opens one's mouth, somewhere a little black mark goes against one's name. In West Bengal, if we speak against government of India, nothing is going to happen to us. So I don't claim any credit for being brave. But I certainly think that those who are sitting in places where their name goes down the minute they sign a letter of this kind, I think they are brave people. And I submit that every society needs brave people. The common citizen has to be brave. I think I said it.
I just want to take you on one of your points which you raised. Do you think there is any advantage for serving bureaucrats? You have serving bureaucrats.
No, all the time.
Okay. So this is what I was going to tell you. That you don't have serving bureaucrats. You have retired bureaucrats.
It's against the service laws.
Okay.
Don't you dismiss the
But
mistake?
the or transferred. Yes. The issue is that does this maintaining a high moral ground actually help in achieving your aim?
No, I don't think we are maintaining a high moral ground. We are pointing out what happens thereafter. It's information also for the public because, on paper it sounds so nice. Nicobar is going to have a new port, a container terminal. It sounds wonderful. The country is going to develop. But what happens to the environment? I think Mr. Goenka would be knowing about this project, right? Isn't it an India's project? Many people don't think about it. I think when we speak about these things, some people at least are woken up. Not everybody knows everything about every issue. We have access to certain information which perhaps because of working in that area we have access to. Many people don't have that information. That's what I was
So to respond to your point, I am actually the applicant before the NGT. We challenged the environmental clearance and the forest clearance for the Nicobar Port project. Unfortunately for us, the chairman of the NGT, who is a retired Supreme Court judge, in violation of a Bombay High Court order and a Supreme Court order, constituted a special bench headed by himself in violation of the NGT Act also and dismissed the application. We are in the process of filing an appeal in the Kolkata High Court. And the Nicobar Port project actually involved the destruction of 130 square kilometers of prime forest untouched by human intervention, houses endemic species, is the home of Shompen tribals who are primitive tribals and are not exposed to, fortunately, mankind as we know it. And the compensatory afforestation for 130 square kilometers of forest being destroyed is going to happen in Haryana. So this is the kind of justification the government has come up with. Everybody we've spoken to in the shipping industry says an international container terminal at that location is non-viable. The armed forces already have a base in Nicobar Island and they don't really want 300,000 people landing at their doorsteps and so on and so forth. But this whole project is being justified on the basis of strategic interests of the country. Now, on the one hand, our Prime Minister talks about climate change and the need to protect the environment, and on the other hand, the manner in which the Environment Ministry is functioning and giving clearances left, right and centre for every project is actually quite shocking.
Let's get in the media. What do you think? Do these things help? Or is just a group of individuals, as I said, trying to hold a high moral ground and pursuing, admittedly, in support of their own conscience, but achieving ultimately very little?
Well, I think they've actually achieved a huge amount, and in the past 2 decades, if you see, you start from the RTI movement, where it was completely a dead act, to you go to Nirbhaya, and you see what happened when she was talking about going to a police station, and it was the entire Nirbhaya movement which ensured that within a span of, probably 45 days, I remember the late Chief Justice J.S. Verma and Leela Seth and others who really burned midnight oil to get something, give something in writing to the government implementing it in terms of an ordinance, and then getting it passed in both houses of parliament in record time. So there have been movements. The other, of course, as recent as the farmers' movement, where the farm laws were passed by both houses of parliament, made an act, and then you had the Prime Minister understand that these farmers are not going to leave the capital. And they have stood there for 8-9 months and consistently shown their resilience towards what they believe is going to be something that will affect the farmer to a great extent. And finally, the Prime Minister himself crumbles in terms of deciding to take back. And there has been really a huge, if I might be permitted to use the word, huge success in citizens' movements. And I think these acts, if we speak today, something that is currently, it's been stopped at Janpat, the wrestlers' protest, and the fact that they've said, even threatened to throw their, medals into the Ganga, is something that has really made the authorities stand up. The wrestling chairman has now, there's been an FIR finally filed against him. And mind you, this has been 4 to 6 months of a great deal of struggle from the powers to be, and making them to stand up and understand, to finally to a position where, they have decided not to hold its public rally in Gonda. And I think these are things which make people stand up. This is very transformatory. It's participatory in nature. And I think the dynamics of this entire, if whichever government is there, and I heard both the former police officer, bureaucrat, they've used it effectively in their terms at a personal level. But at an institutional level, if you don't have this dialogue and this debate, what did the pandemic show us? That 6 out of 7 people feel very insecure. Our voting percentage internationally, the world over, has really reduced. And more people are taking to the streets. From Tehran to, you go to Santiago, to wherever. This is really a learning process for India. And why are they doing it? It's not out of great love that anybody wants to sit in Janpat. I can assure you that if you've ever gone there, it's not easy. There are no toilet facilities. It's under a great amount of strain. And the fact that they do this is really a matter of a lot of courage and conviction and commitment.
It would have, of course, been completely different if the person concerned belonged to some other political party.
Well, I think if you honestly look at it, these are beyond political parties. If you look at RTI.
Do you seriously think if the Wrestling Federation chief that all these wrestlers are protesting about belonged not to the ruling party but to some other party, the same thing would have happened?
Yes, of course, definitely. Because
they still had to spend 6 months instead of 6 days to get their problems looked at.
Well, that's definitely a case for. And actually, to be very honest, it's not because of the government, it's because of the Supreme Court. It's because the Supreme Court asked them to register an FIR. And, if not for the Chief Justice and the Supreme Court intervening in this entire proceeding, that they have actually got result, because they have knocked at the powers to be. But this is after 2 months of, really sitting down there. Their struggle carries on much earlier. They have complained and told the Sports Ministry at least 1 year ahead. 6 months down the line, they have been working and protesting. But for the last 2 months, they've been sitting down in Jantar Mantar. And that's how this, it has made them stand up and so definitely it has.
Let's get Ashok in. Ashok, your views on this, and also, have you, in any of your films, highlighted anything about citizens' action?
I'll quickly comment on what Mr. Prabhu said. He was very incisive in what he said. But I'd have to say that the role that the media has played, by and large, I'm not talking about NDTV or what it was, has not been a very salutary role. We have found that particularly the English channels are vying with each other to curry favor with the parties that are in power. And one is trying to outdo the other. Now, whereas in the Nirbhaya case, the media played a stellar role, in bringing the culprits to book. Whereas in the Jessica Lal case, it was the citizens' action, which was extremely important, the day-night vigils. Here in Calcutta, we had the Rizwanur case, where similar vigils were held. In the case of the wrestlers, the media has not played a very positive role. This needed to have been said in the terms that Mr. Prabhu has said. So this is a little dissatisfying, and this is where I think there should be more citizens' action too. The other thing which Mr. Goenka has pointed out so well, so beautifully, somehow we are still having this anthropocentric view that the human being is at the center of the universe. But we do not realize that the human being will soon be out of the universe if the other, microorganisms and other things cease to exist. As my films are concerned, I have shown mass movements, as you yourself pointed out, in Shunno Theke Shuru, which was about the ultra-left movement, film I made in 1993. But it was interesting because when I started that film, the Soviet Union existed. But by the time I completed the film, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. So it was the students and the citizens who were the voices of protest. And as Shamaldar so rightly pointed out, that their hearts were in the right place, although they may have been misguided. So I showed that, and I did another film called Shesh Shongat, which was commercial. But if you look at the Nandigram and Singur Andolan, these owed a lot to the citizens' action. It was the citizens and the ultra-left parties, the SUCI, who were somehow sidelined later. And as Dr. Chatterjee so rightly pointed out, we are at a different point of, a different nadir that we've reached right now, so far as the state government is concerned. But at that time, when real injustice was being done, it was the students that took up cudgels. That's what I feel.
Yeah, no, just for correction, I didn't point out any Zenith or Nadir, but we all know about it. I'm just going to go to the next issue, which is perhaps a little controversial, but I will start off by asking Mr. Goenka whether some of these so-called citizens' movements that we see tend to highlight more the protesters than the issue that they're protesting about.
Well, I think there's a whole range of citizen movements, and obviously there are going to be people who hijack movements for their own personal interest, and that very often happens when there's a...
And we've seen plenty of that.
Yeah, of course. And there are also NGOs run by politicians, there are NGOs run by bureaucrats and by journalists and so on. So everybody has their own axe to grind. I think it's really for the public to decide who is actually acting on the genuine benefit for the public at large, or if somebody has a personal angle in the movement that they are spearheading.
Sunil Prabhu, do you think people do these movements so that the lights shine on the protesters, and somehow in that bright illumination that the protesters find themselves in, and in the glare of the national media where you rush in to cover them, the actual issue and the people that could benefit from the issue are soon forgotten?
So I would say yes and no. And why I would say yes or no, because there have been certain movements where you would probably know the people who have been responsible but haven't ever become taken it for their personal benefit. You'll see Aruna Roy, who's a former bureaucrat with the RTI, and many others who took part in that. In Nirbhaya, it was a people's movement, but really you don't see any leader. The India Against Corruption, we have seen the whole emergence of the Aam Aadmi Party and everything else. And mind you, sadly, Prashant Bhushan and Yogendra Yadav are completely ostracized today from that entire movement. And it really, in the farmers' protest, was all about all organizations who are participatory and being part of that entire exercise. And what results did it have? You have actually repealed laws which have been passed in a hurry during the pandemic and made everybody sit up and think. But you can't find, and they didn't bend. Mind you, today what happens in the new India is very, very scary, because there is an attempt to intimidate or to tarnish the image of a citizens movement. Give it a political overtone, as you're talking about, or give it, get an ED raided or a CBI case, which happened in the farmers' movement, and yet to resist that and succeed without anybody emerging as a leader is a plus point. So it actually depends on those people who are really part of the movement, whether they're really committed, or do you have an ulterior motive, or does it bring out a derivative? The Aam Aadmi Party, as they call themselves, is a political startup and doing very well. So it's very difficult to say yes exactly, and there will also be no. So it's very nuanced in that sense.
Ms. Chaudhary, what do you think? Quite often these movements that people do highlight themselves rather than their movement.
I think it's just part of collateral damage. It really doesn't matter. If the movement gets moving.
And what happens if but one of the other things we've seen.
I don't think you'd be able to give examples. Exactly. Who would you speak of? I think the movement has always been bigger. I mean, can you really name a movement where the person became bigger than the movement? Aam Aadmi Party, I mean, that was a political thing. It should be done out.
That started off as a movement against corruption.
It did. He became very big. He became a chief minister. But I think it's part of the collateral damage. If you want movements, you have to have people who are going to, shed out their, masks and become something else. It doesn't matter. If the movement is there, that movement is a very big thing. It deserves to exist. I don't know if I'm given it.
Yeah, Mr. Dotto, on that same topic, do you think sometimes these mass movements serve as a surrogate for politically motivated exercises?
Mass movements, there will be mass movements where somebody has to piggyback. And classic example is Kejriwal of Delhi. He made use of Anna Hazare with the ulterior design of coming into political limelight, which he did ultimately. And poor Anna Hazare has gone into the oblivion. And if you see, you will find that ever since Aam Aadmi movement has withered away, there is not so much of tempo of mass movement after the farmer strike in India, where we have seen that the issues are important, the leaders, they don't matter. Ultimately, at the end of the day, issues strike the conscience of the people and not the leader. And if the issues cut across all your barriers and really touch the nub of people's the way of looking at things, the leaders don't matter. And if you really look into the history, not history, into the events in West Bengal, the mass leaders who have really flourished out of the movement, initiated by them, ultimately have not been voted in or voted out for by the people, but the issues have lived on. And wherever you find that the issues are not very important, and I have seen if issues are important, they compel the government to change provisions in the Act and enact new Act to encompass the sentiments of the people. And today what is much more important is that because of the information technology, what we have seen in the Yasmin Revolution or the Spring Revolution, things happen on the quiet. Leaders do not come out in the open. And you do not know who the leader is. Who is the chap pressing the key in Oslo where from you are coming? And Calcutta will stir or take a note of that. As you mentioned, your lecture being mentioned in the Twitter or raised by question by your student. He was perturbed about what happened to my master, what happened to my teacher, what is he saying like that? Is he not aware of his senses? So such kind of conversation or interaction or exchanges take place around the clock. And you will have to bear in mind that today's actors, they are tech savvy, they are daring, they are daunting, they are young, and they mean the world to have become a flat world. No more I am restricted by Nandigram. I can go beyond Nandigram and strike my port to incite people and take care of the issues of the people and take it forward. So therefore, leaders may try, and it may give temporary kind of dividends to them. But at the end of the day, it's the issues that matter, because the people are behind it, and people take all risks to carry it forward.
Let's just go back in time a little bit. When you were in the police, or Madam Chaudhary was in the bureaucracy actively, and you had some sort of a citizens movement, maybe in the district, maybe against a small issue like a plot of land or a water body, and maybe people like Mr. Goenka would have been happy to go to court and spend hours and hours of his time to persuade the powers that be that this was an environmental disaster happening. And Mr. Prabhu, if he had time, would have covered it on his channel, and even Ashok would have put it into one of his films. But when you had this movement, did you feel this is just an irritant which is interfering with the normal amount of work you have to do in terms of your administrative duties, and also all the things you have to do to please your political masters to make sure that you have a reasonable position in the police system? Would you have perceived of it like that at that time? It is different now, of course.
In answer to your question, you should be gracious enough to other gracious ladies.
Not so gracious.
Go on. I mean, now you're part of this group that is criticizing the government. I know you did criticize the government even when you retired, or just about to retire. But would you, when you had these sort of groups, you were a district magistrate somewhere, and in that district somebody was protesting because...
Actually, it's very interesting, because I've written so vehemently about the left front. Can I put it on? Yes, sir. I've written so vehemently about the left front, but the fact remains that the first 10 years of their rule, it was extraordinary, really extraordinary. I mean, we were participating in people's movements, the administration. There was a thing called Operation Borga, which was to record the Borga dance. Before the left front came to power, farmers, the small farmers, had to give away 2/3 of the crop to the Jomidar and retain 1/3. It was never enough to see them through. They starved. The left front came in and started Operation Borga. And I can tell you it was a completely illegal operation. We would go to our village, the Jomidar or Zamindar would not even be given a hearing. Some people would stand up and say, we are Borganas, we write the names down, fine, you are Borganas. So, to some extent, it was highly irregular. But I would say 80% of it was correct, because it was a village meeting. People would have protested. In each village we used to...
But you're taking excess property and giving it to why?
No, it's not excess property. Recording a Borgana is not taking property. You're recording him as a Borgana. He's entitled to, if the owner of the land gives the inputs, then he's entitled to half. If the owner of the land gives nothing, which is most often the case, then that man is entitled to 1/4. Nowhere was it written that he could grab 2/3 and leave the fellow to starve. When you record, this plot has a Borgana, you're going by the law of the land. It's permitted under the law. And that's what we did. So, you might say that I had a sort of baptism by fire in Bengal where I was idiot. One learned to do a lot of corner cutting with the blessings of the government. I got entangled about 300 contempt cases because the zamindars went to court and got injunctions. So half my time was spent in the field and half the time appearing in a high court. But anyway, the short point I'm trying to make is that the left front did use people's movements very well. They did an excellent job. When the 1978 floods took place, the panchayats newly elected rose to a man or a woman or whatever, and they did fantastic work. Now at that point, a large number of NGOs came forward, and my first initial desire was to strangle them. Because they would go off anywhere they felt like with their, khichdi, meant for 20 people where there were 300 people waiting. And they created a lot of law and order problems for us. But then later I thought, these people are giving their time and energy. They are wading through water, they are reaching food to people. One should understand what they are trying to do, and I developed a lot of respect for them. So I would say my hostility to people's movements and NGOs is actually very muted. I mean, when I was serving, if anyone chose to kick me, I felt probably I deserved it.
Mr. Doctor?
Dr. Chatterjee, you know what most of your questions relate to what we would have done, what the media would have done, what the environment would have done, what film would have done. For these two categories, we and Madam on one side and they on the other side, our interest is different, our food is different. But the one who dictates both the food and the item is missing today's evening. And I really shocked to find that you have not invited a politician. And I never knew a doctor can be having good girlfriends in the driver's forest, but not a politician. Politician can have as good a girlfriend in the forest as a doctor, or for that matter, anybody. Now, had you invited a politician, I don't know whether it is a willful omission on your part or compulsion. There was no one available. And because all these questions, now an incident has occurred. I have gone as the superintendent of police, or Madam has gone as the district magistrate. Our good old days instructions were deal with it, and deal with it to restore peace and order, and ensure that thereafter there is no repercussion, and if there is repercussion, what is to be done. Now that kind of training in administration got a jolt when 69 the Marxists came into power, and 69 was a learning lesson for them, and 77 was the period of delivering. Now during this period what we noticed was that frightened the administration. Let the administration be coerced enough mentally or visually to take a pause before jumping into the fray and dealing with it as a law and order issue. And how do you coerce the mind of a politician? You ask him to do a certain thing which is not desirable. Does the bureaucrat or the policeman oppose your diktat? If they oppose and stick to their ground, this chap has to be taken care of. And they send a message direct to you. Look here, chum, I am the boss. My party is involved. Go slow on that. If there is party other than mine, you can do whatever you feel like, but not beyond a limit. And therefore, Prabhu would have been happy covering the Ground Zero operation. My friend in the film would have made a script out of it for his next production. And Mr. Agarwal would have gone very unhappy, crying into the sky saying, what happens to my environment? But in the process, what has improved is the environment of consciousness of people, and thereby people today are much more conscious. If you think that they are going to come and appear before you to protest, sorry. They are going to sleep tight, spend the night when you are busy, and take care of your problems and put it out on the ground to let you know, look at you, things are not okay.
Mr. Goenka, this is exactly the point I was going to make, which is all these citizens' movements really boil down to a conflict between practicality and persistence. Those of us that have the time to be persistent, why is this tree being cut? Or why are they building on the Binsar site in Calcutta, which should not have any building by the law, and can spend hours behind it, perhaps get people like you involved going to court, perhaps get media to cover what we say, can be very persistent. But the practicality is, A, you have to have that sort of time, and B, it is extremely likely that apart from your conscience, there will be nobody who will be victorious at the end. So, in this conflict between practicality and persistence, are we losing this battle? And as average normal citizens like myself, who are not ex-bureaucrats, policemen, or film directors, or media, or legal people, do we just feel, what's the point of the exercise? The practicalities is, again, as I said, what's the point of having a high moral ground and saying like somebody on the second row here would do, I am going to take this up, why have they cut a tree to build a hut on the Binsar site in Calcutta where we shouldn't have anything built? Or would I say, just forget it, it's a waste of my time, and I could do much better things to make the world a better place to live in than to pursue this?
Well, a whole lot of questions for me to answer. But first, let me respond to what was said by the previous panelists. My experience has been that there are very few bureaucrats and police officers who are willing to take a stand when they are serving in office. There are a handful I've known who have stuck their necks out and taken a stand and really gone out of the way to help the environmental movement which I've been associated with. And there have been very many who have just said, it's none of my business and please don't come and waste my time. In fact, I remember being thrown out of the office of a DCP in Mumbai when a group of us went to talk to him about noise pollution in the mid-80s. And we were told, don't waste our time. Noise pollution is not an issue for the police. We are only here to solve murders and dacoity and so on and so forth. And at that point of time, there was no realization how much stress can be caused because of noise pollution, how much crime occurs because of the stress factor and so on and so forth. But things have changed for the better. Noise pollution is part of the law, and the police are empowered to take action against noise pollution violations. Secondly, if you want to deal with the bureaucracy and the system, you have to be persistent. Just taking an interest for a week or a month doesn't really help. That has really given us a huge multiplier effect when we take up issues in court. And the opposite side knows that our lawyers are appearing pro bono and they are paying through their nose their counsel, who very often are not committed and don't do the job that they are really meant to do. Movement on the ground. And I must say that we have been very successful in a lot of cases that we have taken up.
So do you think you're telling us that persistence pays and one should be persistent? We don't get pro bono lawyers. Most of us don't.
Well, actually, I think if you have a public interest litigation in mind, you won't have a problem finding lawyers. But I think your credibility is very important when you approach a lawyer, and they are also very careful about the kind of clients they take on, especially when it's pro bono.
For sure.
The last thing a lawyer wants is his client disappearing at some point of time because the client is fed up or has been bribed or bullied into giving up the case. Then the lawyer is left holding the baby, and that's something the lawyer does not really want to face.
For sure.
Before I come to this point, just want to go back to what you said at the very beginning, that when a citizen is acting, we say it's action, but otherwise, is he just sitting around? This reminds me of the fact that nowadays we have an occasion for every day or a day for every occasion. It's a Father's Day, Mother's Day, and all that. But the first time that a year was identified was in 1975, which was the International Women's Year. And the interesting thing then was that somehow the year became more important than the woman. You see, we should be working for women or for children or for citizens all the 365 days of every year. So here too, what Shrandeep is trying to say is that we try to make an occasion of this, whereas we, at every point of time, should react in some way or the other. Now, if I were to slightly complicate the issue by saying that a citizen's action is not necessarily a mass movement. You can also act individually. Every pebble that you throw is important, like that pebble that the little boy threw at the end of Ankur in Shyam Benegal's iconic film. So what we have been trying to do is, even in the social media, which is much abused and decried because people write poetry and all that, if people can just come out with it. We don't come out with this because we're afraid of the powers that be, or we want to stay close to the corridors of power. But if we keep writing, for example, right at this moment, even though I was the dean of SRFTI, which is under the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, I made my displeasure very clear that this clubbing together of all these institutes like, say, the FTII, SRFTI, the NFDC, the National Film Archive, which has a completely different philosophy and credo, under the NFDC is ridiculous. And it leads to a problem of conflict of interest because NFDC also competes, also produces films, and NFDC will also be organizing things like the national awards. So we needed action from the students, and we need it at this moment. Somehow, protest has disappeared from our lives. We need to protest more. We need more of citizens' action. Where is the protest gone? In our state too, education is in a shambles. And it's not just because of corruption, but because of lack of quality, because of nepotism, and people are not saying anything. This is the problem.
Or do you think they've said enough and are now tired of saying because it's not getting them anywhere? So they have better things to do than say when they're not heard.
That may also be a point, yes. We've been saying this ad nauseum and nothing is happening, but I think a more concerted effort is required. Since we have Mr. Sunil Prabhu here, one of the factors that worked, and I may be wrong, you can contradict me if you like, in the victory of the Congress governments at the state in Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh and Rajasthan were those interviews that Prannoy Roy was constantly conducting, talking to the people, and we could get a sense of these so-called underdogs winning. This time, of course, in Karnataka it was predicted. But I did feel that, you need to go on, as Mr. Goenka said, go on, bash on regardless, because that is the need of the hour.
Mr. Sunil Prabhu, it has to come down to you, and I'm going to ask you a very straight question. Do you think the problem with the media is that they're so obsessed with breaking news that they're no longer interested in achieving a breakthrough?
Well, I think their job is not to, get into the breakthrough. The breakthrough is meant for people you have to actually portray what people's interests are and what is actually happening.
So we see coverages of organizations that a young lady in the second row also runs, of some water body in southern Calcutta suddenly has been covered up and a multi-story building is being built there without any permission in a place where it couldn't be built. And the media highlights that because it's breaking news and it gives them a lot of visibility, audience, etc. But that carries on for 24 hours. And after that, what's happened and how that water body is built? Now you've got a 24-story building there. Everybody's living happily ever after, except the two people in that environmental group that protested and for the first actually contacted Mr. Sunil Prabhu, please come and cover this for NTV. But there's no follow-up on that. Because you've got your points, you've got your brownie points by covering it as breaking news or something happening.
The brownie point of breaking news and also the fact that you've highlighted it, and then of course the past that we allowed that that building to come up, and then you wake up one day like in Bangalore and Chennai when there are floods, and you realize that this is exactly what has happened, and if you don't have a sea to send the water, you'll have a similar situation like this that takes place. So this is definitely something that the media is not the answer. And I see the tendency to, look at media as possibly highlighting and also finding a solution. They cannot be. They are no substitute to governments. They are no substitute to the bureaucracy. They can portray what is actually happening.
They form one of the pillars of the democracy.
Absolutely. And we are the fourth pillar, and our job is to portray and explain what is exactly happening. But beyond that, to expect a solution to come from the media, I don't know whether that's entirely correct. But I would like to get back to the point of persistency. I, in my own way, as a journalist, and I invite your club whenever you come to Delhi to see what we have done as a citizens group, because I believe citizens action is a correct word. Citizens movement is very badly misused, and citizens action is something that we have done for the late Sheila Dixit actually started it off with the Bhagidari, the RWA movement. Look at many places in Delhi where they've done transformatory work, a bottom-down approach. I have a 45-acre park which is, just beside in the poshest area of Delhi called Vasant Vihar. And 5 years down to this day, dead bodies used to be found, rape. If you remember, Pramod Mahajan's son was caught with drugs. That was a park which had been completely disused. Citizens came together. They tried a bottoms-down approach, went to the bureaucrats, went to the police to try to stop and help to get this place improved. Didn't succeed. Finally, the then Lieutenant Governor, Mr. Anil Baijal, and hats off to him, believed in the citizens and just said, promise me one thing, that you will not come back fighting. And we have proved to him that today we use reusable water for a 45-acre park, and like that we've done it for various other societies, and have transformed that place. It's a poor man's Sundar's nursery, and really have a look at it one day and just see what it is. It's been portrayed in the media, but you can definitely make a change, and if you're persistent. I mean, from the top to from the bottom to the topmost in DDA, everybody rejected it. This was more multitude. This had to take, there were encroachments, there were a whole lot of other issues, and you had to really succeed. So persistence does pay off, and citizens' action is critical today because however much, whichever government you have, local, at the municipality, at the state level, at the central level, they can do as much as they can, but they can't replace what is a people's, initiative and a citizen's action, which is critical if you want to make a difference.
But Sunil, you are skirting the question raised by Vishwanathan, whether Pranay was instrumental in the victory of the party in so many states.
I think we'll allow him to answer the question over dinner. I'm going to tell you a true story now, before I get your final comments, and then we'll leave it open for some questions from the audience. A few days ago, a classmate of mine parked his car in his garage in Calcutta, was walking to his front door, and he was hit by a motorcyclist. And the motorcyclist happened to be a civic police also, to make things even worse. He fell down. He had a fracture of one of his spinal bones. And he had to be brought to see me. We did investigations. We proved it was a fracture. It was necessary to claim his insurance for him to have filed an FIR that he was hit by a vehicle. So his wife went, obviously he was in no position to move. He was in bed rest. His wife went to the police station to lodge a complaint. And because they heard that the driver of the motorcycle was a civic volunteer, and the civic police are very much in the news in West Bengal currently, they did not take it. They sent her to 3 police stations, one where the accident occurred, one where the civic police volunteer was from, and one which was a borderline area between the two. Nobody accepted it. 3 days, she and her teenage daughter went around trying to register an FIR. Forget, they weren't interested in prosecuting the person, they were not interested in trying to say, why did he do this, etc. All they wanted is because they wouldn't get their insurance claim otherwise. And nothing happened. Persistence, they went in this scorching heat of Calcutta. This young girl, who's all of 16 or 17, with her mother, spent all day in police stations and nothing happened. So that was what persistence did.
But what did the doctor do?
And the doctor just rang up somebody and said, you have 5 minutes to tell me whether you will take the FIR or call the police commissioner. The OC registered an FIR without even the relatives being there and WhatsApped the FIR to me in 5 minutes. And I gave it to him. But that shows that persistence doesn't pay, and citizens' movements don't pay. Citizens' contact pays, and that's what I'm going to ask you, Mr. Doctor. Do you think citizens' contacts are far more valuable than citizens' actions?
After contacting you, I'm returning home so so happy that I know Dr. Chatterjee. I've got an agent to take care of my problems if required. And therefore, here the man got the insurance paid by the company. So you have done a marvelous job as a citizen and as a doctor.
Yeah, but it shows that citizens' action is secondary to citizens' contact.
But your action superseded other inaction.
Madam, what is your comment? Do you think citizens' contacts in this country pay more than citizens' actions? That's the practicality of it.
I think the power of the net is simply wonderful. We live in an age. We live in an age where you can do all kinds of things with the net. I mean, I might not have been able, supposing I was not in a position to ring up the police commissioner, then I would have advised the 16-year-old that you splash it on the media all over the place. You put it on Facebook, and if you read up enough, you'll find that you can even lodge an FIR on the net. This has been allowed. Am I not right? Yeah. You can lodge an FIR despite the thunder being uncooperative. So knowledge is also a very basic tool for every citizen. I mean, we cannot operate without knowledge. We have to know the laws, and certainly we have to have contacts. I'm not denying the power of contacts. But what I am saying is that we live in a certain privileged world because of the net. And I would like to take this opportunity, with your permission, to digress completely. Which is why, I fiddled with my mobile and I found out the name of the book I was referring to. It's called Rag Darbari. It's written by Srilal Shukla. It's in Hindi. It's not really a citizen fighting for his rights. It's more like a madman chasing the legal process. But it wonderfully, wonderfully holds up how terrible the legal process is. And this is something we need to know. Because this all-consuming faith we have in courts, that you go to the High Court, everything will be solved. It's not really true. We need to fight.
Mr. Goenka, your take on that? Contacts are more important than action in this country.
Well, I think you have to have a basic knowledge of how the system works to begin with. And
so again, practicality triumphs over persistence.
And if the duty officer refuses to take an FIR, you can always go and see the senior PI. And if I tell the senior PI, which I've done in many cases, okay, I'm going to see your DCP now, that itself does the trick very often. So you have to know how to work the system, and of course, having friends and contacts does make a huge difference. But to develop that kind of network, you need to have grey hair and...
But the irony is that the citizen's action we're talking about involves the common citizen, sans financial, political power, who in a democracy has a right, therefore, to use his actions to get the fruits that he's looking for. Now, if you're going to have contacts or money or political contacts, then all this makes nonsense of any form of citizen's action, does it not? Or if you have lawyers who are your friends who will go to court and appear free for you, that doesn't happen to the common person. So again, it makes nonsense of the system of saying that citizens' actions help.
I'm sorry, but at some point of time, and even today, I am a common citizen. And I will always remain that.
And you are much more empowered than what you were earlier.
That's right.
There is no uncommon citizen in this country who thinks he is not a common citizen.
And who doesn't think he is not empowered.
Yes, exactly. Ashok?
I think contacts matter, and that's a very sad thing. And we've been trying to show this in cinema also. Not only my cinema, I can mention a film. It's a Kannada film, Mr. Prabhu may know, called Tabarana Kathe, which was made by a gentleman called Girish Kasaravalli. And the import of that film is very similar to Rag Darbari, the Srilal Shukla novel. He goes from pillar to post to get a small bit of emolument that he was owed, and he gets it after he dies, actually. So he didn't have the contact, so he couldn't get it. There's another film called Halodia Sorai Baudan Kai, which is an Assamese film, same thing. So for the person who doesn't have financial strength or doesn't have a kind of a glamour or economic status or social standing, it is very, very difficult. But having said that, I would still say that citizens' action is required to point this out. It worked in the case of Jessica Lal. It worked in the case of Nirbhaya. It should work in the case of the wrestlers who are protesting. It definitely worked in the farmers' protest. And the farmers' protest was, I would say, it was a magnificent kind of a battle that they fought, because the government was opening it out to the corporates. The corporates would have direct access to the granary, which would be literally terrible. So we still should persist with action in whatever little way we can do. But it is a fact, I agree with you, Dr. Chatterjee, that in this country, contacts matter, and that's a sad thing, a very, very sad thing.
Dr. Chatterjee, I have a small question.
Yeah, go on.
Now I recollect that when Aristotle was asked about citizenship, he had mentioned that an honorable man may not be a good citizen. Nobody asked him, can an ordinary citizen be an honorable man? What is your answer?
I was talking about the high moral ground, and you know, in 1191, a battle was fought in this country. It was called the Battle of Tarain. And you know what happened in that battle? Prithviraj Chauhan defeated an Afghan invader called Muhammad of Ghor. And because he had this high moral position, he said, I have imprisoned him, but I'm not going to kill him, because we have to deal with things in the proper way. He released him. The next year, Mahmud of Ghor came back, defeated Prithviraj, killed him in public, and of course the whole history of the Indian heartland changed after that. So this is the difference between a high moral ground and practicality.
But he didn't have a contact to help him.
Well, there wasn't NDTV at that time. So we'll get Mr. Sunil Prabhu into the final comment about contacts versus persistence in terms of citizens' action.
Actually, I would put it differently. It all boils down to education. If you have a good education, you know, I'm surprised that in Calcutta you have to go through this problem. In Delhi, you can file an FIR online, and you don't have an issue at all. Oh, then what was the problem then?
She didn't know about it.
Okay. So I mean, so it boils down to education.
Tomorrow, try and file an FIR online saying that a scooter has hit you on the road. And no, sir, if you file, it is not the same. I'm just saying that it is different for you to file, because, you know, the problem is that bureaucrats, politicians, governors, media people. No, I'm not referring to anybody on the dais, but they perceive the world as they are ordinary citizens. But those of us that never had, those of us that did not have, were not endowed with power at any point of time, the perspective is a lot different. So I'm going to end by asking each one of you at the end, and I'm going to start with Ashok this time so that Shamulda can finish. Do you finally think that citizens' action is a waste of time? Yes or no? Why? You have 1 minute.
I think it's certainly not a waste of time. If we start with the Boston Tea Party, that was the beginning where it all started, and citizens really created something. I feel that there are problems, and we are living in a kind of perpetual present. That is our problem. The famous postmodern philosopher calls it the perpetual present. We're living in that era. So we just want to think about today. We are myopic. But we need to activate ourselves. And of course, contacts, problem, there's waste of time. But despite all that, we have to jump into the fray. I'll just end with a story, one of my favorite stories, that we have lots of theories about these things, but sometimes the theories don't work. Like, you know, the famous pediatrician, Dr. Benjamin Spock. He had the theory that corporal punishment was very, very wrong. But one day he had to do some adjustments to his house. So he had piled up some cement. And the street boys, the urchins, they messed up the cement. So he remonstrated with them and said, please, don't do that. But the children messed up the cement again. So he told them in a not so soft voice that don't touch the cement. They are there for a purpose. But the children messed up the cement again. Now Dr. Spock lost it and started beating up the children. Whereupon a neighbor came and saw him actually beating up the children and said, but Dr. Spock, I thought you believed not in corporal punishment. He said, my theories hold in the abstract, not in the concrete.
Sunil?
So I have, I think, argued effectively the need for citizens' movement and citizens' action and the great benefit that it has. Today, the world over, if you see globally, I think political efficacy is something that is going to be a new catchword in the years to come. Various governments, through citizens' assemblies, through citizens' juries, through deliberative polls that we will take place, would like to grasp how are things taking place, because even though you're voted for 5 years or a longer period in various democratic systems, you will always want to be spoken to the powers that be, and they will definitely need to engage with people in the years to come. So it's definitely a new medium. It's a trying time. We've had successes, and let's hope if things go the positive way and more people lead the lives that they value and are educated.
And finally, do you think the media has played the role it should in highlighting these movements?
That's a separate debate.
No, yes or no answer.
I would be extremely nuanced to say yes and no, because that's another seminar paper.
Go on, Mr. Goenka.
I think we've forgotten how this country has got independence. Without a citizen movement, we won't be sitting here right now. And I obviously believe that citizen movement is all that makes a difference in a democracy. And I think all of us really need to take up cudgels and fight for issues we believe in.
Ms. Chaudhary?
Thank you. Permitted, I'd like to tell everyone here a little story about the maid and me. My maid, who lives in a slum and is from the Sundarban. Both of us bought fans with 5-year guarantees. Somehow it so happened that we bought the fans within a space of 2 months. Within 1 year, my fan developed a problem. Within about 1.5 years, hers was older, but anyway, simultaneously, both of us had problems. I looked at the 5-year guarantee. I rang up and they told me to go to help. So I did nothing. I repaired the fan on my own. My maid told her niece, who said, "Taina ki mashi, cholo dokane." And she went to the shop and shouted and shouted. And they caved in and said, "Fine, we'll repair it. Go away, please." So the moral of the story is individual effort helps.
Open failed, but she
Last word.
I cannot say in one word.
No, last word. Yes,
I can share with you, we had an interaction with some people from the Labour government I'm talking about in the year 1985 or 86. And on the same subject, how your civic sense is much better than ours, despite you having ruled us for 200 years. What did you leave behind? They shared with us a kind of a system they have evolved, which is called the ladder of performance or ladder of participation. And that ladder has got 8 rungs, 3 at the top, 3 in the middle, and 2 at the bottom. The bottom 2 were the worst. And the part that represented the rung of the lowest ladder was manipulation and therapy. If you are able to avoid manipulation and therapy, you should move into ladder 3, which is in the second part of the ladder. And what are the 3 parts of the second wing of the ladder? Informing, considering, not consulting. And thereby they meant was that you are giving the people the voice, listening to the voice, but not to the views. So if you have a ladder where three uppermost parts are the strongest, and what are those? Those are participation, democratization, socialization, and at the end of the day, a citizen in command and in control. You have the best kind of a citizenship which helps and does not hinder.
Talking about ladders, I always think that one of the most beautiful ways we as children got used to the nuances of success and failure in a democracy was the game involving ladders. It was on the opposite side of the game called Ludo, and it was called Snakes and Ladders. And you realized that you could struggle and go up the ladders, but at times you went up to 97 and got that awful snake that brought you down to 16. And I think whoever invented this game did so to teach children, if you live in a democracy and you want to have citizens' rights, remember there are both ladders and snakes if you have to get to your target. I'm going to stop here, and I think the panelists have agreed very quickly to take a few questions in the last 5 or 10 minutes that we have. And yes, Julie, leading as always from the front. Can we have a microphone? Not that Julie has a voice that will not be heard, but... No, they have a microphone. You address the question as a whole and any panelist can answer. Don't direct it at any one person. It may be taken personally.
Absolutely. That was an amazing session. Bits of humor came through with very serious recollections. Thank you for that. I want you all to just look around this room. And what is scary for me, I think would be very scary for at least 8 of us here who are professors or teachers who deal with young people between the ages of 14 and 22. I, for one, and the 2 people on the 2 sides of me, teach master's students. I think I must congratulate Ashok and all of you, but mostly Ashok here, because as a teacher, he brought up very, very gently the issue of fear, the word fear that he invoked. You know, young people that I meet on a daily basis in class, we talk about the women's suffragette movement to get the vote for women. We talk about Vietnam War and how the Vietnam War was won with little people from the fringes. We talk about every single issue that comes up in the media. And when we ask around as to why we don't protest enough, they say, Ma'am, first of all, I don't think anybody would really, we don't know how to do it, anybody would really listen, and there is a fear. Kichu hobe. Amader baba mara bole, kichu hoye jabe, chhede de, jeta korar setai focus kor. ওই সব representation করে আর action করে কোনো চাকরি তো পাবি না. So, you know, the entire ethos of how we were brought up, and we raised our hands and we said, enough, that has gone. Now, I don't know why it has gone, but it's very much missing. And having worked in several countries in Southeast Asia and in North America, I'm actually very disappointed that this is the way things are in our country. There is a self-censorship among students. Would love to hear your views.
We'll ask Shamulda to take that. Fear. People are...
I think she started with the women's.
Okay, Ashok.
No, there is a fear of being either ostracized or criticized, or as Dr. Chatterjee was telling us before, losing your jobs or being transferred. So this has been ingrained. So we are not speaking out. I think there should be much more of a hullabaloo about the wrestlers' protest, but it's not happening. I agree with Julie entirely.
Hello. Sunil, you want to say something?
Not really, but I'll just juxtapose this, ma'am, with the Nirbhaya movement. Yes. It just happened, it's ironic that, it's just incidental that just outside my house was the police station. The incident happened a few 200 meters away from, I think, a girl being raped at 9 o'clock in the night in a bus, made people stand up and made students, whom you are talking about, the same age group, from JNU, from Delhi University, get onto the streets of Delhi and on Rajpath and do what they did, and ultimately brought in a change in terms of laws and made everybody sit up and really take note. Ashok is asking me, why not the wrestlers? Today, the powers that be and the bureaucrats as well as the police know how to control this. Why have you seen today that on Jantar Mantar, the day when the new parliament building was taking place, you had all these wrestlers being removed and not being permitted to come back again? So you are definitely fighting a movement, you are fighting a system which is very, very difficult, and it's not the same as it was, say, a decade ago. And that's the reason for why people have the fear. They fear that, and you saw that with the army recruitment. People from Bihar as well as Uttar Pradesh, they were told that if you are found in any FIR, you'll not get into service. And that's the fear that these kids have. You are building it up, but internally, you can see social media is a way for them to let out that steam in a way, be it on Instagram, be it on Facebook, be it on Twitter, and hopefully someday there will be some way to actually, as I said, governments of this in future years will use political efficacy to ensure to do these deliberative polls to actually gauge people's understanding, because not many people are voting. If you see, the percentage is actually going down, and I'm reiterating that point that 6 out of 7 people feel far more insecure all over the world after the pandemic.
But do you think politicization of the entire system is really to blame for this?
Well, politics is part and parcel.
It's not politics, but it's politicization. So whether you are appointed head of the Department of Neurosurgery as a professor doesn't depend on whether you can operate, whether you can teach, or whether you know anything about neurosurgery.
That's the tragedy, that you are trying to capture institutions, and that's something that must be stopped and allowed to function in its normal. Leave it to professionals to handle. Hopefully, there will be a conversation on that.
Any other questions?
Yes. Good evening to all of you. I have got a simple question because I'm 79 years old. I'm really pondering what is happening to this. I'm Dr. Ashok Das Biswas. I am an industry-turned academician in the management. We are discussing here how many minuscule percentage reached your views. You are in an air-conditioned room, discussing nicely. I know Ashok a little bit because I know his wife earlier. But I'm wondering sometimes, this is giving us a very intellectual kick that we are discussing. Who we are reaching? Who is listening to us? Simple example I am giving you, irrespective of the party era. I have gone to the police station a few times to make the diary of my car accident. Boshun, boshe achi. As if I do not have any work. আধ ঘন্টা বাদে বললাম আর কতক্ষণ বসবো আমি? আরে বসুন না মশাই, নিচ্ছি। একবার গড়িয়াহাট থানায় একজন এসআই দেখেছিল আমাকে, দেখে বললো বসিয়ে রাখছে, আর আপনি আসুন আমার কাছে, কি হয়েছে বলুন। ঠিক এই তো আমাদের অ্যাপাথি। শ্যামলবাবু বলুন, যে বলুন, কে কি করেছে বলুন তো? এই যে পুলিশের অ্যাটিটিউডটা, এই যে অ্যাপেথি টুয়ার্ডস দ্য পারসন, কে কি করেছে, কে কি করতে পেরেছে আজ পর্যন্ত, একটা আমার আছে। আর একটা হচ্ছে এই যে আমরা ডিসকাস করছি এত, আমার বাড়ি বীরভূম, my ancestors' home at Bibhum in the Rampurhat nearby. So after my retirement and all these things, I sometimes go there. And I find your talk has got no meaning. I'm sorry, sir. They don't understand what you are talking here. না না, সব সময় মশাই তাই ছিল, এখন ওই বেটার ছেলে হয়েছে, সরি ফর মাই ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ। একটা ঘটনা বলছি, তারা বুঝবেন আপনি। একজন ছেলেকে বলছে, এই তুই কাজটা করে দে, সরি ইউ ডু দিস ওয়ার্ক, হাউ মেনি মানি ইউ উইল গিভ মি, both are put through. So one is asking money for the work. Most of the people are busy with their own thing. They don't bother. You are talking about Nirvaya, Jessica, all this thing, big publicity. How many people are raped in the village? What you have done? What you can do? Nothing. This is the world. Throughout my 17 years experience, I have born in Calcutta, educated in Calcutta, I have performed the left movement, everything. Now I'm in management, fine. আমি কিন্তু আনসার পাচ্ছি না। দুদিন বাদে মরে যাব, I will die, but I don't know what is the answer. I'm a member of Bengal Club, big talk, big discussion, fine. What we are achieving? Yes, some of the movement, all these things are there, but how many percentage? How many girls are being raped and crying and doing suicide in the villages? I don't get answer. So I don't want to prolong my talk. I'm not frustrated. I'm disillusioned. Throughout my life, all these big, media people, they talk and take the people. Everything is breaking news. What is this? I'm tired. All the TV, breaking news. All the TV, breaking news. They have some meaning of that? No meaning. Breaking news. Who is Bill the cat? One person start the breaking news, everybody is breaking news. I'm not frustrated, but I'm disgusted. I will die tomorrow, fine. I know his wife because his father was working with me in Neo Pharma. I know his father, what they have done, what they are doing. But again, in the film, what do you do? What I will catch it? What kind of issue will click? What kind of issue will make my film popular? And this is the rat race is going on.
I think, sir, your point is very well taken. You have any other questions? Yeah, with that, the last question we'll take.
I think you did a spectacular job in framing the entire issue in the subcontinent, really, in India. But you didn't really look abroad apart from Aristotle. I think we shouldn't forget the mother of all these, to use the terrible phrase, the mother of, well, let's not go there. We shouldn't forget the EDSA revolution, which threw Marcos out of power in 1986. 3 million or more people, Filipinos, who'd suffered the Marcos administration's excesses, summary detentions, killing of journalists were shot like flies. You couldn't raise your voice against him. We talk about a sense of psychosis or fear. That was something to be seen. But then these people came out, and the People's Power actually swept Marcos out of power. So I think that was something in our own neighborhood. So that's the one thing I just wanted to say. The second being that the idea of a citizen, the Romans defined a citizen as, even a foreigner could become a Roman, a slave could become a Roman too, provided he adhered to the ideals of what the Roman identity was. He had to subscribe to the idea of what being a good Roman means. I'm not sure if we do that here. I'm not sure if we have two classes of citizens, the uncommon and the common, and I'm not sure if we, as good Indians, subscribe to a common idea, like the Romans tried to do, of what these attributes are that makes us great.
Thank you. And I think on that note, we come to the end of this panel discussion. Now it is only for me to thank our panelists, Mr. Shamul Datta, Ms. Kalyani Chaudhary, Mr. Devi Goenka, Mr. Sunil Prabhu, and Ashok Vishwanathan. You've been excellent panelists. And just as a small token of Bengal Club's gratitude, and I'm going to request Mr. Kunal Sen, President of the Bengal Club, to come up. And also, on behalf of ABP, I'm going to ask their CEO, Mr. Dhruvo Mukherjee, to please come up to the dais to offer a small memento to our panelists who spent so much of time talking about things that they not necessarily would have done otherwise on a Saturday evening.